Today, we're turning to a woman whose quiet love and faithful service transformed a community. Maybe you're wondering if anyone notices those acts of service or the small ways you show love. If you are, today's episode is definitely for you. So today's story begins in the coastal town of Joppa, where we meet a woman known as Tabitha. You can find her story in Acts chapter 9, verses 36 to 43. Now, Tabitha worked with her hands creating garments for the widows in her community. Widows in those days were outcasts in society, often dependent on charity for their needs. And yet Tabitha's love and acts of kindness restored their dignity, their worth, even their humanity. She gave these women back their dignity. They became part of a community. This love was signified by the garments she made with love for each one of them. Every garment carried quiet intention. Love was folded into every seam, each stitch a small act of love. But Tabitha became ill and died. So they prepared her body for burial and laid her in an upper room. There seems to be an unspoken sense that Tabitha's death was unfair, perhaps even premature. Tabitha was so essential to their lives and happiness that they simply couldn't imagine life without her. Now, the believers heard that Peter was in Lydda, which was around 11 miles away from Joppa. It was a walk of around 4 to 5 hours, perhaps a couple of hours by donkey. So they sent 2 men asking him to come without delay. When Peter arrived, he was greeted by crowds of widows weeping, many of them showing him the tunics and other garments that Tabitha had made. Can you imagine that scene? It must have been just so full of emotion. Now, Peter goes to the upper room and he gets everyone to leave the room, and he speaks to Tabitha. She opens her eyes and sits up. And then Peter called for all the believers to come and see that she was alive. And so the good news spread across Joppa and many came to faith. Now, what I love about this story is the love we see in these women for Tabitha. Because with each stitch, each quiet prayer, she's turned their lives around. She not only saw them, but each garment she sewed declared their worth, their value. Her quiet acts of love transformed them from invisible to seen, from outcasts into women who were loved and cared for, women who had worth. They wept not just because of the loss of the woman they loved and who loved them, but because they feared that this new identity would now be stripped away, that they would once again be invisible and unloved. That's something, isn't it? When making a garment for someone can help them see that they have value, help them realize they're loved by God. And in that, of course, Tabitha reflects the very heart of Jesus, because in Isaiah 61:10 it says, "He has clothed me with garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness." And of course, that's exactly what God does for us. Just as Tabitha covered the widows with garments that said, "You're not forgotten," Jesus wraps us in dignity and calls us his own. I think that's why Tabitha was so loved, not for what she did, but for the value she saw in each of these women, for the way she looked at them, for the way she worked to help them see their own worth in the sight of God. Perhaps you felt invisible at times, perhaps overlooked, reduced to your circumstances rather than celebrated for who you are, known by a label rather than known for your heart or your actions even. Does any of that sound familiar? If Acts gives us a model for how the church is meant to be, this story really sheds some light on our role as women. If we go back to the beginning of the book of Acts, it starts with Jesus telling his disciples that they're going to be witnesses to Jerusalem throughout Judea and to the remotest places on earth. And this is what, in her own quiet way, Tabitha did. She was a witness serving the widows in Joppa. And elsewhere in the book of Acts, we read that their hearts were mutually linked to one another and that they shared with one another whatever they had. And this is exactly what Tabitha did as well. The Bible calls her a disciple. In fact, she's the only woman in the Bible to actually be called a disciple. And being a disciple means that she's known as a follower of Jesus, that she tried to live like Jesus. We can see this clearly in the NLT version of this story in Acts 9, where it says, "She lived her life doing kind things for others and serving the poor." That's Acts 9:36. She shared what she had. She had love. She had skill with a needle. And she changed lives through that quiet service. And she was so vital to her community that they sent for Peter, hoping that she might be raised from the dead. Later in Acts 6, we see that the early church is committed to caring for widows, and they had a daily food distribution for them. Yet, of course, even on the television, we've seen that when food is distributed, often there's no dignity, no love, and no kindness. Yet Tabitha, her quiet acts of kindness and generosity, her words of encouragement, her care for these widows helped them to feel seen and valued. She wasn't preaching or teaching. She was just doing what she was able to do, living out God's love to those around her. What she did was practical. It met a real need and made a real impact on people. It reminds me of a quote, I'm not sure who it's by, which says, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." Perhaps you've looked at others around you and aspired to have a recognised ministry role, to have your gifts acknowledged by them, to be seen for who you are. Or perhaps you've wondered if your quiet acts of love and service matter, if anybody notices those small kindnesses. Tabitha's story is amazing. It shows us her serving quietly behind the scenes. This woman who saw the unseen, she was seen by God. She didn't focus on what she didn't have. She did what she could with the skills and gifts that God had given her. And she was content to simply serve, to love these women. And that enabled them to have dignity and to see their own worth and value. Perhaps that's why she was called a disciple. Okay, time for an aside here. I've always wondered something. Even when I don't have the money to buy a copy of The Big Issue from a homeless person here in the UK, when I speak to the seller, they usually respond with a smile and kind reply. This story made me wonder if the reason they smile when I speak to them is because they're so used to being invisible, to being ignored, that the simple act of someone acknowledging them shows them and reminds them that they actually matter. In John Burke's book, Imagine Heaven, he suggests that one recurring question that people are asked in heaven is, have you loved well? Now, I don't know if this is true, but it's a really challenging question to consider. And I think that Tabitha would have been able to answer yes. Since I heard that quote about being asked, have you loved well, it's a question I've been asking myself. I've also found that it's a good prayer to pray each morning, especially when the day can feel overwhelming. Father, help me to love well is a really simple prayer to pray. Think of the people who've made a really significant and positive impact on your life. How many of those were because of their skills? And how many were because of their kindness or their love? Only love has the power to restore dignity, to help others see their God-given worth. You don't need a title or a platform to be someone who changes lives. You just simply need to choose love. As we close today, I want to leave you with this thought. You might wonder if those quiet acts of service really matter, if anyone notices those small acts of love or kindness. But this story reminds us that God sees every act of kindness, every act of love. All he asks us to do is to love well, to use whatever gifts he's given us, however small they might seem, to help others see their worth in his eyes. If this episode has helped or encouraged you, would you take a quick moment to leave a rating or review wherever you found it? It helps other women find hope and encouragement in today's challenging world. If something from today's episode has stirred something in you, I'd love to invite you to explore more in my book, Invisible Women of the Bible. It explores the stories of women just like you, women who struggled, hoped, persevered, yet was seen by God. I'm just in the final editing stages of the book, so I will let you know on the podcast as soon as it's been released. Each chapter is just 2 pages long. It's designed with busy women in mind. You can download a copy at jennifercarterbooks.com. That's Jennifer with 2 N's. It's also available on Amazon. Just search Invisible Women of the Bible by Jennifer Carter. Until next time, remember, God sees you and your story is not over yet.